I was rushed to the hospital, unconscious, after a brain aneurysm nearly ended my life. The doctors told my parents this might be my last night. Their reply: they were at the dog park, so I made one phone call and took back their home. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The pain came on without warning. One moment, I was standing in my kitchen, meticulously chopping vegetables for a soup I was planning to portion out for the week. The next, a bolt of lightning seemed to strike the base of my skull. It wasn't a headache, it was an explosion. The world tilted violently, the vibrant green of the celery and the bright orange of the carrots blurring into a sickening smear of color. My ears rang with a deafening, high-pitched tone, and a wave of nausea so powerful it buckled my knees swept over me. My hand, still clutching the knife, went numb. It clattered to the floor, a sharp, metallic sound that seemed to come from a great distance. I remember thinking, with a strange and detached sense of clarity, this is it. This is how it ends. My body slid down the cool surface of the kitchen cabinets, my cheek pressing against the linoleum. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me whole was the dust bunnies under my refrigerator, and I felt a pang of absurd regret for not having swept more thoroughly. Then, nothing. Consciousness returned not as a gentle dawn, but as a fractured, confusing series of sensations. The sterile, antiseptic smell of a hospital, the rhythmic, insistent beeping of a machine somewhere to my left, a dull, pounding ache that lived behind my eyes. I tried to lift my head, but it felt as though it were made of lead. A soft, familiar hand immediately covered mine. "Clara, oh, thank goodness, don't try to move, you're okay, you're safe." My eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus on the face hovering above me. It was Maria, my best friend since kindergarten, her usually cheerful face pale and etched with worry. Her dark curls were pulled back in a messy bun, and her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying for hours. "Maria." My voice was a dry, rasping whisper. "What?" "What happened?" "You had a brain aneurysm," she said, her voice thick with emotion. She squeezed my hand, a grounding pressure in the sea of my confusion. "You collapsed in your kitchen. I came over when you didn't answer my texts. I found you. I called for help." The memories flickered, the pain, the fall. It felt like a scene from a movie, not my own life. A doctor, a kind-looking man with graying temples, came in and explained it all in calm, measured tones. A subarachnoid hemorrhage, an emergency coiling procedure. The words washed over me, clinical and terrifying. He said I was incredibly lucky. Lucky that Maria had found me when she did. Lucky that the surgical team was so quick. Lucky to be alive. As he left, leaving Maria and me in the quiet of the private room, the full weight of it began to sink in. I had almost died. The thought was a cold stone in my stomach. A question, small and hesitant, formed in my mind. "My parents," I croaked, my throat still raw. "Do they know?" Maria's expression tightened. She looked away for a second, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes before she forced herself to meet my gaze again. "I called them, Clara. The moment they got you into surgery, I called them." "And are they on their way?" I imagined them frantic, rushing from their home 3 hours away, their faces a mask of parental fear. It was the only image that made sense. Maria took a deep breath. The doctor, Dr. Evans, he spoke to them himself. He had to. He told them the surgery was high risk. He told them. He told them that you might not make it through the night, and if they wanted to see you, they needed to come immediately. Her words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. I braced myself for the next part, for the story of their panicked drive, their tearful arrival. But it didn't come. "Clara," Maria began, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "your mom said they couldn't." I blinked, certain I had misheard. The machines beside me continued their steady, rhythmic beeping, a stark contrast to the sudden chaos in my mind. "Couldn't? What do you mean they couldn't? Was there an emergency? Is Tessa okay?" Maria's eyes filled with a mixture of pity and rage. "Tessa is fine. They couldn't come because they were with Tessa at the dog park. Her new puppy was having its first socialization day." The words didn't compute. Dog park, socialization day. They were nonsense syllables, a language from another universe. The beeping of the heart monitor seemed to grow louder, faster, echoing the frantic thumping in my chest. She said, Maria continued, her voice trembling with barely suppressed fury, "Oh, that's terrible news. But we can't just leave. Tessa would be so disappointed." She asked if the hospital had good parking and said they'd try to drive down sometime next week if you were still there. A cold, creeping numbness spread through me, starting in my chest and radiating outwards to the tips of my fingers and toes. It was a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital air conditioning and everything to do with the absolute, soul-crushing certainty of being utterly and completely alone. I had faced my own mortality, stared into the abyss, and my own mother had decided a puppy's playdate was more important. The physical pain from the surgery, the throbbing in my skull, the weakness in my limbs, it all faded into the background, eclipsed by a new, sharper agony. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. The first 48 hours of my recovery were a blur of pain management, neurological checks, and the suffocating weight of what Maria had told me. Nurses would come in to shine a tiny flashlight in my eyes, asking me to follow their finger. They'd ask me my name, the date, the name of the current president. I answered their questions robotically, a performing seal going through the motions. But inside, my mind was a churning vortex, replaying Maria's words on a loop. We can't just leave. Tessa would be so disappointed. Maria was a constant, solid presence. She brought me a real toothbrush, saving me from the tiny, useless ones the hospital provided. She brushed my hair gently, her fingers untangling the knots with a tenderness I hadn't realized I was starved for. She read to me from trashy magazines when the silence became too loud, her voice a soothing balm. She was my anchor, the only thing keeping me from drifting away on a tide of despair. On the third day, a small bouquet of carnations arrived. The card, written in my mother's neat, impersonal cursive, read, "Hoping you feel better soon. Love, Mom, Dad, and Tessa." There was no "we're so sorry," no "we love you," no "we were terrified we'd lost you." It was the kind of card you'd send to a coworker you barely knew. I stared at the cheap, pink flowers, a symbol of obligatory, half-hearted affection, and felt a profound emptiness. That afternoon, summoning what little strength I had, I decided to call them. Maria offered to do it for me, but I needed to hear it for myself. I needed to hear the tone of their voice to gauge the depth of their indifference with my own ears. I dialed the familiar number, my thumb trembling slightly. My father, Robert, answered. "Hello." His voice was flat and curious. "Dad, it's me, Clara." "Oh, Clara, how are you feeling?" There was no surprise, no relief, just the same mild tone he used when asking if I'd gotten my oil changed. "I'm alive," I said, the word tasting like ash. "The surgery was successful." "Well, that's good news. That's very good news," he said, a little too brightly. "Your mother will be pleased to hear it. She's just in the other room with Tessa. They're trying to house-train the new puppy. Little Monster peed on the antique rug." I closed my eyes. The puppy, of course. "Dad," I said, my voice low and tight, "the doctor told you I might not make it." There was a pause. I could hear faint, happy shrieks from my sister in the background, followed by my mother's indulgent laughter. My father cleared his throat. "Well, yes, doctors have to say those things, don't they? Prepare for the worst and all that. No sense in all of us getting into a panic, especially with Tessa being so sensitive." Tessa was sensitive. I, who had just had my brain sliced open, was apparently not. I could have died, Dad, alone. "Now, don't be dramatic, Clara," he said, his voice taking on a familiar, dismissive edge. "You weren't alone. You had that friend of yours, Maria. And we sent flowers, didn't we? Your mother picked them out herself." I felt a surge of cold fury. It was so potent it made my head throb. This was my father, the man who was supposed to protect me, telling me not to be dramatic about nearly dying. At that moment, something inside me shifted. The deep, aching hurt began to cool and harden, crystallizing into something else entirely. Something sharp and clear. "Put Mom on the phone," I said, my voice devoid of the emotion that had been strangling me moments before. He complied, and a few seconds later my mother's voice came on the line, brisk and impatient. "Clara, Robert says you're feeling better. That's nice. Listen, I can't talk long. Tessa's just about to try out the new agility course we built for the puppy in the backyard." "I see," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I just wanted to let you know that I'm alive. I'm sorry if that's an inconvenience to your schedule." "Don't use that tone with me, young lady," she snapped. "We've been very worried." The lie was so bald-faced, so utterly transparent that I almost laughed. "Worried enough to drive to the hospital," I countered. "Or just worried enough to send a $5 bouquet of carnations?" "We have responsibilities here." She huffed. "Tessa needed us. It's not all about you all the time, Clara. You're 29 years old. You should be able to handle a little hospital stay on your own." A little hospital stay. She said it as if I'd gone in for a routine checkup. The conversation was over. There was nothing left to say, nothing they could ever say that would fix this. They had made their choice. They had chosen a puppy over their daughter. "You're right, Mom," I said softly, and I could hear her preen, assuming I was capitulating. "I can handle it on my own." I ended the call without saying goodbye, my finger pressing the button with a decisive click. The room was silent again, save for the steady beep of the monitor. My heart rate was perfectly even. The storm inside me had passed, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. They had treated me like a stranger, like a distant, inconvenient relative. Fine, that's exactly what I would become. As I stared at the bland, white ceiling of my hospital room, a plan began to form, built on a foundation I had laid years ago as a quiet act of self-preservation. They thought I was just their responsible, doormat daughter. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. My entire life had been a training ground for their neglect. I was the practice child, the one they made all their mistakes on before my sister, Tessa, arrived 5 years later and was instantly crowned the family jewel. I was the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who never made waves. My role was to be the steady, boring backdrop against which Tessa's vibrant, exciting life could unfold, and I played my part beautifully. I remembered being 16, saving up every penny from my after-school job at a bookstore for a celebratory trip with my friends after graduation. A week before we were set to leave, my mother, Brenda, sat me down at the kitchen table. Her face was arranged in a look of pained sympathy that never quite reached her eyes. "Clara, honey," she'd begun, "Tessa has been invited to an exclusive summer ballet camp. It's an incredible opportunity for her, but it's frightfully expensive." I knew where this was going. I could feel the money in my savings account, earned over hundreds of hours of shelving books and dealing with cranky customers, turning to ash. "Okay," I said, my voice small. "We just can't swing it right now," she continued, her hand patting mine in a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt like a cage. "Your father and I were thinking, that trip of yours, is it really that important?" Of course, it wasn't. Nothing of mine ever was when weighed against a desire of Tessa's. I withdrew my savings, all $1,200 of it, and handed it over. I watched from the window as they drove Tessa to the bus station, my father, Robert, loading her expensive new suitcase into the trunk while my mother fussed over her hair. I spent that summer at home, listening to my friends' joyful stories from their trip, a hollow ache in my chest. Tessa came back 2 weeks later, complaining that the camp was boring and the other girls were snobs. My sacrifice wasn't even appreciated. It was simply expected. This dynamic only solidified as we grew older. I went to a state college, working 2 jobs to minimize my student loans. I chose a practical, stable career as a financial auditor, a profession that suited my meticulous, detail-oriented nature. Tessa, on the other hand, was encouraged to find her passion. This involved a series of expensive, short-lived hobbies funded by my parents and, increasingly, by me. There was the pottery phase, the artisanal soap-making phase, the equestrian phase. Each one left behind a trail of costly equipment and abandoned dreams. My parents, Brenda and Robert, were a perfectly matched pair of antagonists. Brenda was the active agent of my marginalization. She was sharp-tongued and deeply invested in appearances. Her love was transactional and entirely conditional, reserved for the daughter who made her look good. Her comments were always barbed, designed to remind me of my place. "Oh, Clara, another beige sweater. You should let Tessa take you shopping, teach you a little something about style." Or, "It's a shame you're always so busy with work." Tessa truly understands the importance of enjoying life. My father was, in some ways, worse. Robert's weapon was silence. He was a passive observer, a man who would rather swallow his tongue than create conflict. He saw Brenda's blatant favoritism, her casual cruelty towards me, and he did nothing. He would just offer a weak, apologetic smile and change the subject, leaving me to weather the storm alone. His inaction was a form of complicity that cut just as deeply as my mother's words. And then there was Tessa. My sister wasn't overtly malicious. She was simply a black hole of self-absorption. She had been raised to believe the world revolved around her, and she saw no reason to question it. She'd call me not to ask how I was, but to ask for money for a concert or a weekend trip, her voice full of the breezy entitlement of someone who has never been told no. "Hey, Clara, can you spot me a few hundred? I'm totally broke, and this music festival is a once-in-a-lifetime thing." The money was never paid back. It was never meant to be. Their collective focus, their great shared treasure, was the family home. It was a large, beautiful Victorian house that had been in my father's family for generations. It was their pride and joy, the symbol of their status. And they had made it abundantly clear that it was Tessa's future. "One day, this will all be yours, sweetie," Brenda would say, sweeping her arm across the living room, pointedly ignoring me standing right there. "You'll raise your own family in this house." They spoke about it not as a family asset, but as Tessa's rightful inheritance. They were just its current caretakers. Their interest wasn't in the memories held within its walls, but in its monetary value and the legacy it would provide for their favored child. I was just a temporary resident, a long-term guest in my own childhood home. But I knew something they didn't. I knew who really controlled those walls. Lying in that sterile hospital bed, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The fog of hurt and confusion had lifted, replaced by a quiet, humming resolve. The years of being the family's emotional and financial shock absorber were over. My near-death experience wasn't an ending, it was a catalyst. It had given me the one thing I'd never allowed myself before: permission. Permission to put myself first. Permission to sever the ties that had been slowly strangling me. My shift from passive victim to active strategist began not with a bang, but with a simple request. "Maria," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in days, "can you get my laptop from my apartment and my work briefcase?" Maria, who had been patiently reapplying a cool cloth to my forehead, paused. She saw the new light in my eyes, the steel in my jaw. A slow smile spread across her face. "Whatever you need, Clara, the general is back in command." When she returned, I propped myself up against the pillows, the laptop warm on my legs. The familiar weight of it was comforting. This was my world, my area of expertise. Numbers, laws, contracts. Unlike human emotions, they were predictable. They had rules, and I knew every single one of them. The clever trap, as I thought of it, had been laid 5 years prior. My father had received a small inheritance, and my parents were chattering excitedly about expensive renovations and a new car for Tessa. I saw the money slipping through their fingers like sand. At the time, I was working on a complex case for a client involving estate planning and asset protection. An idea sparked. I sat my parents down, armed with charts and official-looking documents. "We need to protect the house," I had explained calmly. "Putting it into a revocable living trust is the smartest move. It avoids probate, gives us tax advantages, and protects it from potential creditors." Their eyes had glazed over at the mention of probate and creditors. My father, Robert, had waved his hand dismissively. "You handle it, Clara. All that legal stuff just gives me a headache. As long as it doesn't cost us anything now, do what you think is best." My mother, Brenda, was more suspicious but equally uninterested in the details. "Does this mean Tessa will still get the house?" she'd asked, her one and only concern. "The trust documents will name a beneficiary, of course," I had said, choosing my words with the precision of a surgeon. I never said who. They had signed the papers without reading them. They signed the document that transferred the deed of their precious house into the newly formed Thompson Family Trust. And they signed the document that named me, Clara Thompson, as the sole trustee, giving me absolute and unilateral power to manage, mortgage, or dissolve the trust and its assets as I saw fit. They had handed me the keys to the kingdom, simply because they couldn't be bothered to pay attention. They saw me as their boring, reliable daughter, not as a highly competent financial auditor who understood the power of the fine print. Now, from my hospital bed, I opened my email and composed a message to my personal lawyer, a man named Mr. Davies who I had on retainer. The subject line was simple: action required, dissolution of Thompson Family Trust. The body of the email was just as direct: Mr. Davies, please begin the process of immediately dissolving the Thompson Family Trust, of which I am the sole trustee. The sole asset of this trust, the property at 125 Elm Street, is to be listed for immediate sale. Please prepare all necessary documentation for my signature. Furthermore, please draft a formal notice to be delivered to the property's current residents, Brenda and Robert Thompson, informing them of this action and giving them 30 days to vacate the premises as per state law. I will be discharged in a few days and will sign the documents then. The proceeds from the sale are to be transferred directly to me. Thank you. Clara Thompson. I hit send. A profound sense of peace washed over me. It was done. The first domino had been pushed. For the next few days, I focused solely on my recovery. I did the physical therapy exercises. I ate the bland hospital food. I talked and laughed with Maria. And I did not answer a single one of the perfunctory, once daily, "How are you?" texts that came from my mother's phone. I was building a wall, brick by brick, and my silence was the mortar. A week after my surgery, I was discharged. Dr. Evans was pleased with my progress, calling my recovery remarkable. He gave me a long list of instructions for rest and follow-up appointments. As Maria helped me pack my small bag, she asked the question hanging in the air: "Are you sure you don't want to go to your house? Your own bed must be calling your name." "It's not my house, Maria," I said, my voice even. "And it's not theirs anymore, either. Can I stay with you for a little while?" "Stay as long as you need," she said, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "My home is your home, always." We walked out of the hospital and into the bright sunshine, leaving my old life behind in that sterile, white room. We left something else, too. On the now empty bedside table, where the cheap carnations had once sat, I had placed a single, crisp white envelope addressed to Brenda and Robert Thompson. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again. My father. I ignored it. Then came the barrage of texts. "Mom, Clara, we're at the hospital. Where are you? The nurse said you were discharged. Mom, your room is empty. What is this? Mom, there's an envelope here. Is this some kind of joke?" I pictured them standing in the doorway of that empty room, a place that held the ghost of my near death, their faces pinched with irritation, not concern. Then, silence for about 10 minutes. I knew they were reading it. I could almost hear the thick paper crinkling in their hands as they unfolded the cold legal prose from Mr. Davies. The phone rang again, an angry, insistent buzz. This time I answered, putting it on speaker. Maria sat across from me on her sofa, a silent, supportive witness. "What is the meaning of this?" Brenda's voice was a shriek, shrill and vibrating with fury. "We just read this letter, dissolving the trust, selling the house. This is a mistake. You need to call this lawyer and fix it right now." "There's no mistake, Mother," I said calmly. "Don't you take that tone with me." She screeched, "That is our house. Your father's family has owned that house for 100 years. You can't just sell it." "Actually, I can," I replied, my voice as cool as ice. "As the sole trustee, I have the authority to do exactly that. You sign the papers yourself, remember." There was a sputtering on the other end of the line. "We didn't know what we were signing. You tricked us." "I didn't trick you," I corrected her. I presented you with a sound financial strategy. You simply couldn't be bothered to read it. You were too busy. Just like you were too busy to come to the hospital when I was dying." The line went silent for a beat. The truth of my words, stark and brutal, had finally landed. My father's voice, trembling and weak, came on. "Clara, honey, this isn't fair. We were just trying to keep Tessa calm. You know how she gets." "And what about me, Dad?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Did anyone think about keeping me calm? Or did you all just assume old, reliable Clara would pull through? And if I didn't, well, that would be one less problem to worry about." "That's not true," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. "This is what you get for being so ungrateful." Brenda snatched the phone back, her voice dripping with venom. "After everything we've done for you, we raised you, we fed you, we gave you a roof over your head, a roof you are now trying to sell out from under us." I almost laughed. "A roof I am selling, yes. The ingratitude, however, is all yours. You have 30 days to find a new place to live. I suggest you don't waste time arguing with me. The clock is ticking." I hung up the phone, the click echoing in the quiet apartment. The silence that followed wasn't heavy or sad. It was light. It was the sound of freedom. The next few days were a predictable storm of desperation. They tried everything. First came the threats. My mother left a string of furious voicemails, promising to hire a lawyer to sue me, to tell the whole family what a horrible, monstrous child I was. I saved them all. Mr. Davies had already assured me they didn't have a legal leg to stand on. Their signatures on the trust documents were ironclad. Their blustering was just noise. When the threats didn't work, they switched to emotional manipulation. My father started calling, his voice thick with fake tears. "Clara, your mother is a wreck. She can't eat, she can't sleep. You're destroying her. How can you be so cruel to your own family?" "The same way you were all cruel to me, Dad," I'd reply, my voice unwavering. "By being indifferent. You're not upset that I almost died. You're upset that there are consequences for your neglect." The most pathetic attempt came from Tessa. She called me, whining. "Clara, this is so unfair. Mom's crying all the time. Where are we supposed to go? What about Barnaby?" "Barnaby?" I asked, confused. "My puppy. You know Barnaby. We built him an agility course in the backyard. He loves that yard. You can't just take his yard away." I was speechless. She wasn't worried about her parents or the roof over their heads. She was worried about a puppy's play area. A puppy whose socialization day had been deemed more critical than my life. It was the most perfect, damning crystallization of my entire family dynamic. "Tessa," I said, a sense of finality washing over me. "The world is full of dog parks. I'm sure you'll find another one." I hung up before she could respond. The final confrontation happened a week before they were due to move out. My mother called, her voice stripped of its usual fire. It was low, pleading, and somehow more repulsive than her anger. "Clara, please," she whispered. "We'll do anything. We're sorry. We'll make it up to you. Just don't do this. Don't make us homeless." I took a deep breath. It was time for the final ledger. This wasn't about shouting or anger anymore. It was about laying out the cold, hard facts. This was the irrefutable proof they could no longer ignore. "Do you have any idea how much of your life I've been funding, Mom?" I asked quietly. "Let's build a case, shall we? I'm an auditor. It's what I do." She was silent, so I continued. "Let's start with Tessa's artisanal soap-making phase. Do you remember that? The $2,000 for imported lye and organic oils that you borrowed from me? Or the $5,000 for the equestrian lessons and equipment because she saw a movie and decided she wanted to be a show jumper for a month? That was my bonus that year. The bonus I was going to use for a down payment on my own apartment. We were going to pay you back." She started weakly. "No, you weren't," I cut her off. "Just like you never paid me back for the 3 times I covered the mortgage on the house when Dad's consulting business had a slow quarter. That's $12,800, by the way. Or what about the constant $500 here, $1,000 there for Tessa's music festivals, her weekend trips, her designer clothes? Over the last 5 years alone, I have quietly funneled over $50,000 into that household. $50,000 that you took, that you expected, without a single word of thanks. You weren't just neglecting me emotionally, you were bleeding me dry financially. I could hear her sharp intake of breath. She had never seen it laid out like that. To her, it was just asking Clara for a little help. I have every receipt, I said, my voice like stone. Every bank transfer, every canceled check. You talk about the house as if it's your birthright, but the truth is, I've been paying for it for years. I was just too quiet and too responsible for you to notice. I was the golden goose, and you were all too busy admiring the golden child to realize it. But the night you chose a puppy over my life, the goose got wise. The goose flew the coop, and she's taking her golden eggs with her. There was nothing but stunned silence on the other end. The spell wasn't broken for them. They were incapable of that kind of self-awareness. But for me, stating the truth out loud, accounting for every last cent of their selfishness, was the final, liberating act. The sale of the house closes next Friday, I said. The new owners are very eager to move in. I wish you the best of luck in your future endeavors. I ended the call. The silence in Maria's apartment was absolute, and in that silence I felt the last chain break. I was finally, completely, and gloriously free. The call came from my Aunt Carol, my father's sister. She was a woman whose entire existence was dedicated to maintaining a flawless facade of family harmony, a trait that often made her willfully blind to the cracks forming right under her nose. "Clara, darling," she began, her voice syrupy with concern. "I've heard there's been some unpleasantness. Your mother is beside herself. We're all so worried. I've booked a private room at the Oak Room for this Saturday, a family dinner. A chance for everyone to talk things through calmly and put this whole mess behind us." It was a trap, of course. A public ambush disguised as an olive branch. They wanted an audience. They believed that in front of extended family, I would shrink under the pressure of maintaining appearances, that I would fold and capitulate to their demands. They thought they knew my playbook. They had no idea I had written a new one. "I'll be there, Aunt Carol," I said, my voice pleasant. A wave of relief washed through her voice. "Oh, wonderful, I knew you'd see sense. We're family, after all." When Saturday arrived, Maria helped me get ready. I didn't choose a power suit or a dress of mourning. I chose a simple, elegant navy blue dress. It was the dress I had bought for myself a year ago, a quiet celebration of a promotion I'd never bothered to tell my family about. It was a dress that made me feel like myself, calm, competent, and confident. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Maria asked, her brow furrowed with worry as she stood in the doorway. "You don't have to." "I know," I said, turning to face her. "But this isn't for them. It's for me. It's the last chapter. I need to be the one to write it." I picked up a slim leather portfolio from my desk. "Besides, I'm coming prepared." We walked into the private dining room at the Oak Room together. The long table was already mostly full. My aunts, uncles, and a few cousins were making strained small talk. At the head of the table sat the trio, Brenda, Robert, and Tessa. They had positioned themselves like a tribunal. My mother gave me a look of triumphant fury, my father a weak, pleading glance. Tessa was just scrolling on her phone, looking bored. The moment they saw Maria, my mother's face soured. "This is a family matter, Clara," she said, her voice sharp. "Maria is my family," I replied smoothly, taking a seat directly across from them. Maria sat beside me, a silent pillar of support. The meal was excruciating. Aunt Carol chattered nervously about the weather and a recent trip she'd taken, desperately trying to fill the oppressive silence. My mother made passive-aggressive comments under her breath. "Some people have no respect for their elders," she muttered, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "No gratitude for the sacrifices made for them." My father just stared at his plate, pushing a piece of asparagus around with his fork. Finally, as the dessert plates were being cleared, my mother slammed her hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "All right, let's get this over with," she announced, her eyes locking onto mine. "Clara, this ridiculous, selfish tantrum has gone on long enough. You have embarrassed this family. You will call off this sale, you will dissolve your relationship with that shyster lawyer, and you will apologize for the pain you have caused your father and me." The table went silent, all eyes were on me. This was the moment they had been waiting for. They expected me to cry, to argue, to defend myself. I did none of those things. I calmly opened the leather portfolio I had placed beside me. "I'm glad you brought that up, Mom," I said, my voice resonating clearly in the quiet room. "Since you've all been kind enough to gather, I thought it would be a good opportunity to provide some clarity on the situation. I find that numbers often tell a story more clearly than words." I slid a single-page document across the table to my Uncle Mark, who sat at the midway point. "Mark, could you pass that down?" I had printed 15 copies, one for everyone. It was a simple, one-page summary, a balance sheet of my relationship with my parents. On the left side, under the heading Contributions to Household, I had listed in stark, black and white print the major financial outlays I had made over the last 5 years. The mortgage payments I had covered, the loans for Tessa's failed business ventures, the endless stream of cash for her whims. The total at the bottom was a staggering $54,250. On the right side, under the heading The Precipitating Event, I had written a simple timeline. Date October 12th. Event: Clara Thompson admitted to ICU with critical subarachnoid hemorrhage. Time of call: 7:15 p.m. Doctor's prognosis: she may not survive the night. You need to come now. Parental response: we can't. We are at the dog park with Tessa. Her puppy is having a socialization day. A collective gasp went through the room as people read the page. My Aunt Carol's hand flew to her mouth. Uncle Mark stared at the paper, then at my father, his expression turning from confusion to disbelief. Brenda's face went from pale to a deep, blotchy red. "How dare you? This is private family business. You're airing our dirty laundry." "You made it my business when you treated me like an ATM," I countered, my voice still level. "And you made it my business when you decided my life was worth less than a puppy's playdate. This isn't dirty laundry. This is a ledger. And it shows a family that has been taking from me my entire life, emotionally and financially, and who, when I was on the brink of death, couldn't be bothered to drive 3 hours to be by my side." "We were worried about Tessa." My father finally piped up, his voice cracking. "She's sensitive." And I wasn't. I looked him dead in the eye, and for the first time, he flinched. "I was unconscious and bleeding into my brain, Dad. Was I not sensitive enough for you then? Or was I just the responsible daughter you could always count on to not be a bother, even in death?" Tessa, finally looking up from her phone, chimed in with breathtaking ignorance. "It's just money, Clara. You've always been weird about money. And you're fine now, so what's the big deal?" That was it, the final, perfect summary of their entire worldview. My Uncle Mark, a quiet man I'd always liked, slowly folded the paper and placed it on the table. He looked at his brother, my father. "Is this true, Robert?" "The dog park, is that true?" My father couldn't meet his eyes. He just stared at his water glass, his silence a deafening confession. A wave of disgust washed over the room. The tide of family opinion, which my mother had been so sure she could command, had turned against her in an instant. She had wanted a public stage, and she had gotten one. It was just a different play from the one she had cast. I stood up, Maria rising with me. I looked at my mother, my father, and my sister, 3 strangers sitting at the head of a table, their faces masks of shock and fury. They were no longer my burden. "For my entire life," I said, my voice clear and steady, "I have put your needs, your wants, and your comfort above my own. That ends tonight. The house will be sold. The proceeds will repay a small fraction of what I am owed. You wanted me to handle it, Dad, and I have. This is me handling it." I turned and walked out of the room, Maria's hand protectively on my back. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the weight of their ruin behind me, and ahead of me, for the first time in my life, there was only lightness. The 30 days passed. The sale of the house closed without a hitch. Mr. Davies, true to his profession, was ruthlessly efficient. The new owners, a young family with 2 small children, were eager to move in and fill the old house with new, happier memories. The substantial sum of money was wired to a new bank account I had opened, an account to which only my name was attached. I heard about the aftermath in bits and pieces from Aunt Carol, who now called me in a completely different tone. one of hushed respect and pity for my former situation. My parents and Tessa had been forced to move into a small, two-bedroom apartment in a dreary complex on the outskirts of town. The antique furniture they were so proud of wouldn't fit, so most of it was sold for a fraction of its value. Their grand life had been downsized into a handful of cardboard boxes. Brenda did not handle the fall from grace well. Her social circle, built on the prestige of the old house and a carefully curated image of prosperity, evaporated. The extended family, now aware of the full, ugly truth, kept a polite but firm distance. Robert, stripped of his ancestral home and his wife's respect, seemed to shrink, becoming even more silent and ghost-like than before. The biggest shock came to Tessa. With no more funds from her parents and the Clara-funded wellspring officially dry, she was forced to get a real, full-time job. She ended up as a cashier at a large retail store, a position she complained about bitterly. The puppy, Barnaby, was eventually given away. They claimed their new apartment was too small for such an active dog. In reality, they could no longer afford the vet bills and fancy food. The very symbol of their betrayal had become an inconvenient expense. As for me, I embraced my newfound freedom. With the money from the sale and my own savings, I bought a bright, beautiful condominium in the city, with a wide balcony that overlooked a lush green park. It wasn't a grand Victorian mansion filled with the ghosts of obligation. It was smaller, newer, and entirely mine. The first thing I bought for it was a comfortable armchair where I could sit and read for hours, uninterrupted. I used my professional network not for revenge, but for my own healing. I found a highly recommended therapist and began the slow, necessary work of unpacking a lifetime of emotional neglect. I learned to set boundaries. I learned that no was a complete sentence. I learned to distinguish between what I owed others and what I owed myself. One afternoon, about 6 months after the dinner at the Oak Room, I was sitting on my balcony with Maria, sipping iced tea. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Brenda. Your father is not well. We need help." I looked at the message and I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, just a distant, quiet sadness for the people they could have been. The people I once wished they were. I did not feel a pull of responsibility. The emotional tether had finally been severed. I deleted the message without replying. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about letting them back into my life. It was about accepting that they would never be the family I needed and letting go of the anger so that it no longer poisoned me. My justice wasn't in their suffering, it was in my peace. Maria looked at me, sensing the shift. "Everything okay?" I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached my eyes. "Everything is perfect.